Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to a continuation of my discussion of Trails of Cold Steel 4. If you haven't seen the previous two parts at this point in time, be sure to check those out. But just randomly throwing to something that was on my mind at when I finished the previous recording was me thinking about Anton, because it's so neat to see Anton again, because obviously you saw him, obviously you ran into him a little bit here and there in 1, because you ran into him in Auroch. You ran him into Bereahars where you first met him, and then you meet him again, I want to say, at the festival at the end of the first game. But then you run into him from time to time in 2 because he's looking for Ricky. But it's so neat. But he's not in 3 at all, but to see him return, and it's like, once again, it's that thing of like, your students meet him before like Renne returns, and it's like, oh my god, Anton, I haven't seen you like forever. Because like, why are you, like, especially considering Ouroboros getting dragged into all this, especially like one of the points of where Operation YourNerdGasm is taking place is going through Ouroboros, so it's kind of like, why are you here in the Empire at the time? And it's like, what's he in the Empire for? Looking for Sharon, because if you remember, that was like literally the final quest in Trails of Cold Steel 2, during the epilogue. It's basically helping him get, like, because he just wants to get Sharon's contact information, because like she gave him a handkerchief or whatever, like ever since like the festival and everything, and he's been stuck on her, and so he's been looking for her the entire time. Because like, obviously when your class meets him, they don't know about the woman he's looking for, but it's obvious, you're like, he's looking for Sharon, oh my god. And what I love is that him, like I said, you run into him from time to time. I think when you first actually meet up with Margarita, he's actually getting dragged away by the military because they're acting like he's suspicious, because basically the reason why he's here is for love, but they're kind of like, what are you really here for? But I love the fact is that when you run into him from time to time, and then eventually, because obviously the whole Sharon situation makes that complicated. It's like, oh yeah, because like he actually talked about the fact is that the person told him, like, he hadn't been in contact with that person, like basically he had been in contact with Sharon for like 6 months, and she would basically told him to forget all about it, because it was basically, I think he had said 6 months. Maybe it was 6. I don't know. Like, I think he was saying maybe they were corresponding for like the past 6 months, and then all of a sudden she, joining up with Ouroboros again, she was just kind of like, yeah, I don't, she wanted to cut ties with him, just like she was trying to cut ties with the Reinford family, in particular Elisa. And so I thought it was so neat, but like, obviously they meeting again in Misselheim, and their cute little moment, and her being like, you should forget about me. But he talks about the fact is like what meeting and talking to her meant to him, because she was actually kind of flattered. She's like, you literally came all the way to the Empire just just to talk to me, to check on me and stuff. It's just this cute moment. It's actually how you get one extra ticket during Misselheim. It's like after Michelin, it's like after you watch their sub event, you get one. But it's just like, it's so neat. Once again, that lovey-dovey stuff. I would love it if there was a future, like whether there is something between them or not. Since we're on the subject of that, and we're talking about Michelin, let's talk about freaking Kenneth and Annabelle. I am so glad to see that story go full circle like it did, because like, obviously you ran into Annabelle here and there in 1, but obviously you're more consistently see her in 2, and 2 is where they really introduced the fact that she might have a thing, like during that what is it, the side quest in the epilogue where you're helping her, like it's a competition against Kenneth is going up against his brother. And obviously that being the whole through line of being like Annabelle like running away because she was engaged to his brother and not wanting to just, an arranged marriage type of situation. But then for it to kind of, eventually go to the point that she kind of has a thing for Kenneth. And I think it's so adorable, especially because that, because obviously that was a whole thing. Like his brother says at the end of 2, like, oh, it's not my place to say anything, because he recognizes how Annabelle feels, but Kenneth is kind of blind to it. So he's basically like, pay more attention to what's going on around you, brother. Don't let fishing be all there is to it. But obviously, like at one point, she's asking Kenneth, like, hey, like, we should, she wants to kind of tell him how she feels, but she's only able to say, like, oh, we should go on a trip together. And she's like, no, that's not what I meant to say. And Marine's nearby being like, she sadly, she didn't get to say what she wanted to say, but he was all about, oh, let's go on a trip together. And she's excited about it, but at the same time, she's like, no, that's not what was supposed to happen. And then finally, like, he's like, and then at the very end of it, like, to see their story come full circle, him being like, oh yeah, like, he's like, I like you, Annabelle. And he's like, that's what you were trying to talk about the other time. So he knew what she was trying to get at. And it was just like, it finally happened. Like, this, once again, seeing so many like love stories in that same regard. Because obviously you see more like a little bit of like, you don't see it too much in this game. But obviously you see her pop up, and that was so dope seeing Fiona again. But obviously, like her and Nightheart, like as I got at the very end, you see them at the party, and I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but you see Olaf kind of standing behind them. After, I just thought that was so. Like I said, so many like relationships kind of come a little full circle in that. So just like the Anton thing, just got me thinking about Kenneth and Annabelle being super adorable. One of my favorite reveals in this game is the blue block situation. Finding out that he was Alistair, that was so damn good because you run into Alistair and the new Class 7 runs into him and at Michelin, and so it'd be the situation of like, oh yeah, like he's waiting for someone, and then you get it revealed like, oh, it's blue block the entire time. Because I thought that was so dope. Because if you remember in 3, they made a whole point that, like, you know, Campanella in particular, I think him and McBurn were like, yeah, Blue Blanc basically got, like, sidelined because they didn't want to, Ouroboros didn't want him interfering because obviously he's pretty tight with Vita, and obviously their orders are to get Vita, so, you know, but it's just to find out that, because obviously if you remember, you run into Alistair a couple different places over the course of the 3, because you actually run into him first in Mary's house in St. Arc, because that's actually, you know, because obviously he's a famous musician and everything, because obviously that's where you run into Elliot. And I think if you're with Elliot at the time and talk to Alistair, there is a little bit of dialogue in that regard before it to be revealed like, oh my god, that's actually Blue Blanc. Because you also run into him in Orders, because that's actually where you help him with that quest, that little treasure hunting quest, which is pretty dope. Which is interesting considering like Blue Blanc does that whole thing. Which is also interesting too because like obviously Maribel makes it seem like, oh, my stuff was stolen by the Phantom Thief. But when the time comes when she's revealed, not only Rose but also Blue Blanc shows up like, oh, I don't like you using my moniker, using this stuff. Because obviously during the whole thing, like Reem was kind of like, yeah, this doesn't seem like Blue Blanc's style, considering their interactions, you know, over the course of 1, their run-ins in 2, you know. So it was so dope for that to be revealed, especially in that moment, because obviously once again, I want to go back so I can fully appreciate everything. But obviously I went into this not like, I only know the stuff about LeBurl and Crossbell because of the conversations that come up in 1, 2, and 3 about some of that other stuff. So like I didn't know Renne, because obviously you know about Renne because Tina talks about like her best friend. You know, there's even a quest that help her, like it's like, yeah, getting stuff for Estelle, Joshua, and Renne. And obviously we dive into like Renne's past a little bit in this episode game. So I guess there's stuff like before she joined Ouroboros, like she was taken or something, because they're looking at her like, oh, she has purple hair like us, and her name is so, but like obviously Renne doesn't push it too much. It's like her family hasn't forgotten about her, but she just wanted to check up on them, you know, because her dad got, you know, enlisted into the military, because they're actually people that Juna actually knows. So I guess they like, because obviously they live in Crossbell, but maybe they, I don't know, like, but it has ties to Renne, and so I guess this is stuff tied to like before she went to Ouroboros or whatever. But also finding out Joshua was in Ouroboros too, I thought that was interesting, because I knew a little bit, a tiny bit about Joshua's past, because I know like during some of the Trails games, Trails in the Sky games, he gets like into some like starts going down a darker path, and you know, to find out, you know, and obviously we learn more about it in this. Like obviously once again, because I didn't play those games, I don't know a lot of the history. So obviously like his history connected to Luve, the Blade Lord, and also how that comes full circle during the Homo quest. You know, the little bit of Luve's spirit that was there, like telling them good job for doing what they do and keep on going, essentially. I'm super paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact wording for what he says during that quest, but still, like I said, it was just interesting in that moment to have like, because I think Blue Blanc still, I don't know if he ever officially left Ouroboros. I know he just, it does make you wonder about Duvali, Enea, and like them, like, did like without, you know, because that was their main reason for kicking it with Ouroboros, because it was for Leanne, because Leanne took them under her wing, you know, because I actually learned a little bit more about that, like, oh, each one of them before you ended up fighting each one kind of explained like what Leanne meant to them, why they would fight, why the Soul Ritter is so dedicated, or what she did for each one of them, you know. So without her being around, I doubt any of them had any reason to be in Ouroboros anymore. I mean, maybe they do. I mean, once again, like, I mean, they're not even enforcers either, so is it because obviously there's a whole conversation about enforcers having a lot of leeway when it comes to Ouroboros. So, you know, I don't know. Maybe that's something that gets answered in future games or not. But still, I just, that whole situation. The whole point I was just bringing it up is just because I love the, like I said, the blue blonde crew. There's a whole situation with Claire and Lechter, which I think is also interesting because, like, obviously Claire and Lechter are the most reluctant about everything because obviously you pretty early on find out like the reason why Claire and Lechter are so okay with everything is because in their mind they think like this is their penance for Milliam's death. It's like Milliam made that sacrifice of her own volition, but they felt like we were so complicit with everything and we failed to protect me. Like Lechter tries to make it seem like it doesn't affect him as much, but it obviously affects her a lot because obviously I think at one point there's that picture, there's a Milliam's bonding event, like there's a picture from when they after they helped her and everything. It's like, Milliam's like, hey Claire, let's go get ice cream. There's a picture from that, like her, Renne, and Milliam when they went to get ice cream, and obviously you see this in the prologue, and Claire breaks down, because like she just kind of been keeping it out of her mind, but that moment just hit her, because Milliam had sent it to her beforehand, but I think it just took a long time for it to finally get through. And I think it was basically like before things went sideways, she had basically I forgot the exact messaging what Milliam said, but that on top of the picture just it hit her. But obviously it's like, obviously you run into Lechter from time to time because he actually pops up in a Maya side quest, because I think it's interesting, like they're technically branch campus side quests, but they're just regular side quests. They're not separated into branch campus side quests like they are in 3. But like, for example, like you help out Maya like against her dad in a shooting competition, and lo and behold, like Renne is her spotter and her supporter, and Lechter is Joseph's. I mean, it makes sense because Joseph served under her Lechter's dad, so it's almost like very like separacle for that, like to all kind of play out like that. But it is the thing that like he's never really one to ever show you how he really feels. There's only a few occasions where you see him really get caught off guard. I'd say the whole situation with Ash in Heimdall probably caught him off guard. The situation with Milliam, because even he was at one point being like, right before you fight him in 3, he's like, yeah, I don't have any quick-witted remark, because he usually is very like sarcastic and makes some wisecrack or something, but under those circumstances he couldn't bring himself to do it because he recognized the dire situation, because he didn't want what was happening to Altina. But I guess it's like, it probably is a thing of like they'd rather it be Altina than Milliam, but it was a sucky situation all around. Well, once again, they owe him so much, because even Lechter talks about it later on about why he wanted revenge against him, because Claire owes him, because it's like, because of you I was able to get revenge, because of you I'm in this position, you helped me get the truth out there about what happened to my parents and my brother, obviously that being his uncle, that being her uncle, that being Irving's dad. That whole situation, getting revenge, and also like bringing her under his wing, and obviously he did that to all, the Iron Bloods, including Rufus. But it's just interesting seeing that their motives are very different from like Cedric or Rufus's, because both, because there was even a line from Osborne in the 3rd game being like, oh, like, it's every child's a father's thing to see his child surpass him, and obviously Rufus making that comparison in this game, being like, oh, I'm going to surpass my father, that being, Osborne. And Cedric's whole thing being just kind of a bid for power, which I even like that you do, like, obviously you run, like, the whole Pantagruel situation, running into him there, like, him being kind of, like, a little spoiled and being like, no, we're going to settle this right here, right now, even though that wasn't their orders. And then also there's a bonding event Renne has with Alphen, which leads to her talking to Cedric, kind of, because Cedric's trying to say like, you have no purpose. Like, at least during the Civil War, you gave legitimacy to what the Courageous was doing, but now you're not really doing anything. But she was able to kind of talk to Cedric and kind of made it clear, because obviously he made it seem like feelings were weakness, and so like he's like, yeah, I'm glad our brother's alive, but other than that, like, I can't let those feelings bog me down. So he was even pleading with her to leave the Courageous, because truth be told is he didn't want her mix up anything, showing you at the end of the day, despite how far off how far off he seemed like he had fallen, there was still some part of him that did care, at the end of the day. So I thought that was interesting. But for it to come full circle where it's like, Osborne gave him the opportunity by, you know, presenting a curse to him, and it took control of him. But even then, he has to take responsibilities for his own actions because he's the one that wanted power. He was always like, it was basically his own insecurities that got warped by the curse. I mean, that's what it does. So it warped what was already there for him. That the fact is, his insecurities feeling like he felt weaker in comparison to Oliver and even Alphen. Like, you know, obviously she always joked with him and stuff like that, but he's like, I always heard what people said behind, you know, my back about me, you know, and, you know, in comparison to Oliver and Alphen, so he wanted to be stronger. He never wanted to feel weak again. He already felt like that because he was very meekish. Like, as we, you know, got to, you know, meet him in 1 and 2, we got to see, like, obviously he changed very drastically in 3, considering what he went through plus the curse. But at the end, he faced you as himself with being like, I make this choice. Which even that setup where they did the whole Shirley thing, I thought that was interesting. I was like, I never would have expected that those events to be what it was. So it's like Shirley's like, yeah, I'm not really into him, but more like he's like a little brother to me. Because obviously they bring up the whole point of like, oh, Shirley, it looks like you're holding back. Like, you're not really going all out like you should be. And even at the end, like him joining Ouroboros, which I thought was kind of neat. And I should also point that out. I figured this wasn't the end for Ouroboros. I was like, even though this game is ending, this saga of its ending, I knew it wasn't over for Ouroboros because, like, we have not, at this point, we still have not seen the entire organization. Because some of these characters that popped up in this game are still characters that popped up in other games. Because obviously Maribel is from Crossbell games, because obviously, like, Ellie, anytime she run into her, it's like Belle. Like, that, there's a history there. Then there's also, the fact of the matter is Capanello comes from, like, the whole situation with Liberal, because obviously when they run it, because obviously like Oliver's familiar with him as well as the Liberal team being like, oh, we know who you are, fool. And the fact is that they bring up the fact is, how is it that you still look like a kid? It's been years. Why haven't you gotten any older? And that's a whole thing that Juna ends up bringing up to him. Which, speaking of Juna, really quickly, I like that, like the new generation and old generation of Class 7, how like they bring up, because of like what she said during that Maribel and Capanella conversation, it led to an interesting point where it's like, Renne is the core. He is the centerpiece to Class 7, but Juna is the bridge for Class 7. She bridges that. Whereas Renne's the core of Class 7, Juna's the bridge that connects Class 7 to the world. You know, so I thought that was so interesting. And Juna's kind of like, no, don't make such a big deal. And I like that, because obviously there's a lot of parallels between Juna and Renne, because obviously a lot of who Renne is reflected in his students as well. Like, when you take characters like Ash, Muse, Juna, Altina, and Gert, like they all like represent like there's pieces of Renne you can see in him. Obviously, like a lot of what he's imparted upon them as their instructor, you can see it kind of get reflected. So her steadfast like always, like her sense of justice comes from the SSS, but it also comes from Renne a little bit too. You know, she's always had that strong sense of justice when you first met her, but like I think, you know, being a Crossbellan and as well as her whole experience in Erebonia, like obviously that's what she represents. She's supposed to be that bridge between Crossbell and Erebonia anyway. So like you definitely see those two sides kind of come together with Juna as their representation. So I just thought that was pretty neat. But the point I was making is, like, there's so much about the organization we still haven't met, because they talk about like all these enforcers, because remember there's also like the enforcers that Sharon was like, yeah, she tells you in 3, the organization she used to be a part of, some of those members went off and became, like, one became an Anguis and the other became an enforcer in Ouroboros. And I don't know if those are members that have ever popped up in the other games or not, but even then, they're still, you know, once again, Cedric being a part of it too. So it's like, because Ouroboros, it's meant to be, they're like, the whole thing is they have a grander plan. Like, it isn't just all like this stuff with the rivalry and stuff. It's mainly Ishmelga and the curse and everything. That's their thing. The only reason why Ouroboros is helping out is because they want to observe this. That's mainly what this is. It's part of the Phantasmal Blaze plan. It was like the final stage of their gospel plan. Like, they didn't really care for what, because that was the whole reason why everything went down with the, you know, Kia, you know, making an artificial septarian. Like, that's what that was all for. They didn't care whether or not the final form, because obviously it's like when the forms come together, when everything comes together to become the Great One again, it might not be stable, but they don't care about whether it's something that could stay solidified or whether it was something that ended up breaking afterwards. It's like, we just wanted to witness it. Like, it's a small part of just what's going on. So I'm assuming this has to, like, that's why I'm thinking like the next games in this series, like, you know, so it's the end of this saga, whether that it's supposed to necessarily, because that might include the Libero games, the Crossbell games, or whether it's just referring to specifically just the Cold Steel games. But whatever the case may be, I do, like I said, I think the next games might take place in Calvert. Like I said, at this point in time, I have not looked into it, but maybe I will at some point soon enough, because I just feel like that seems like the most logical answer, is to make the next games take, I mean, not unless they take place in Erebonia too, but I feel like this is like the close of the Erebonia arc. Like, each one is like, oh, that's the close of the Libero arc, close of the Crossbell arc, but obviously those come into play in the Erebonia stuff too, but it's still a close off from the Erebonia stuff. So I think eventually we'll, especially what they set up in Calvert of, like, once again, Rocksmith kind of, you know, like, obviously the new president of the Republic being elected. So obviously when it's all said and done, not everything is resolved at the end of the game. There's still a lot of turmoil between the countries because of, like, the Empire's actions during all of this. So that's a whole angle to it. But that's why I was like, the Ouroboros isn't still dealt with. So that might be like, maybe dealing with them permanently might be something in the next set of games, or maybe they're just always going to be the, like, mysterious thing in the background until it's like it fully comes to a head. Because they bring it up at the end, it's like a lot of their members are just kind of going, aside from the ones just like Renne and Joshua, Blue Blanc's off doing whatever he wants. They lost Leanne. There's also the whole situation with, like I said, the Stall Ritter, like whether they come back, you know, or not. Sharon's back with, you know, the Reinford family. So, like I said, it just brings up a lot of questions in that regard. So I thought that was kind of, because as the game was progressing, I was like, oh, we're only getting, like, you only meet one new member of Ouroboros this game, and that was like Maribel. Like, that's it. You don't get any other members. So that's why I was even more being like, oh, they're not done with. Like, the moment that became a thing, that's the only new member of the organization you're meeting. Even though you've met their top brass to a certain extent, because obviously you met Vita, their second Anguist. You met their seventh Anguist, the still mating. You've met their number one enforcer, McBurn, who is literally considered the strongest. And you also meet Campanella, who's the right hand to all of this. And, you know, so, but regardless, that was just kind of like the whole point I was making. I thought was kind of interesting. Another dope thing I thought was, obviously, when you go in, when you're in Crossbell trying to make a distraction so they can climb the tower, because this is when you eventually cross paths. Because obviously this is when you're trying to set up the rivalry with the Steel Maiden, but it gets blocked off by the tower in Crossbell, so you're supposed to sneak in, and that's where you end up fighting Controlled Victor and McBurn. Which, really quickly, I should talk about the fact is, I was so happy when it gets revealed that, like, Toval and Oliver are still alive. Like, Oliver's, like, missing an eye, and there's never going to be any repair for that. His eye is always going to be damaged. But having to, like, when that moment in the Panda Gruel, when they're like, it's revealed, like, yeah, which is also very reciprocal too, because remember, that's when they came to rescue Marine and Alphen, and all the big guns showed up, like, you know, Toval, Sarah, Victor came down, but also, like, you know, obviously Class 7 was there to back Reen up, so it was very similar in that same regard. I should also, I'm all over the place, so I do apologize. I just thought that was a pretty dope moment, and then you're like, oh, but then the entire time I was like, where's Victor? But then you find out Victor's alive, but he's being controlled by the curse. He maintains a lot of his memories. Plus, like, while they were trying to survive, he lost his arm. Because, like, this all plays into, like, the whole thing where Toa was like, George, there's no way you killed Angie. Turns out he didn't. He shot her, but then he put a mask on her to control her. Because actually, Black Alberic wasn't all about, like, his idea of, like, bringing back Crow and also doing what he did with Angelica. He's also the one that warned the others. He gave them time Granted, it wasn't a lot of time, but George made mistakes and he did some stuff that he wasn't proud of. It's actually not until I played it through a third time that I realized that the person who set the bomb was George. Because obviously you see someone kind of like, it's like, oh, they shape-shifted because it seemed like they were using technology to hide themselves, but it didn't really correlate in my head until like I'm playing it the third time through and I see the person change and they're a little chubbier. I'm like, and you see the bottom of their face, I was like, that was George. It didn't correlate in my head that that was actually George who planted the bomb. So I think that's probably why he felt even more like, yeah, because not only am I the one, I think it was Alberic that actually pulled the detonator, but it seemed like George had a part to play in it, and I didn't realize, you know, that he had the direct correlation of being the one who planted the bombs. But regardless, I just thought that was kind of neat how that whole thing played out. But the thing that I was about to say that was kind of popping in my mind because it made me think about like those boss fights on the Panic Roll. It's like the AP system of the game. It's like how certain fights, obviously, like they were in the previous games too, like you have to beat and drop an enemy's HP to a certain point in time, like 50 or 40% by a certain number of turns before the enemy either wipes you out or before the battle automatically ends. There's a couple of those, and a lot of them, basically you get extra AP if you defeat everybody. So like when you fight Shirley, Cedric, and it's, I think, Ada and Fritz, basically you have to defeat everyone within a certain number of turns. And they also, once again, that little, like I said, like the little mechanics they added where they actually give you a turn counter on the side. Because there's actually one when you fight the members of the main campus and Ada, Fitz, and Irving. Like when you fight them, you have to beat them basically within 100 turns to get the AP, of the max AP for it. Defeat everybody, basically. So there's a couple of those. Like for one of them, I think is actually interesting. Like they did it during the Maribel fight because it's Campanello, Maribel, and Sharon, if I remember correctly. I could be I think so. Yeah. So basically, what you have to do is you have to beat Sharon and Campanella first, and then beat Maribel. Because if you beat her first, it automatically ends the fight. There's another one like that with Rutger. Who is it? Rutger, George, and Cedric. You have to beat Rutger and George first and beat Cedric last. There's also another one like that when you're rescuing Renne. Basically, you have to get Osborne and Leanne's HP down to the same, like the recommended markers say like their HP needs to be like down to like half. You have to get it to that mark at the same time, because whichever one you defeat first automatically ends the fight, so you'll miss out on AP. Rather than getting the full 10 AP, you'll only get 5. Luckily, I was able to do it on my second try, so it wasn't that bad. Plus, I was on normal mode, so I'm sure that helped out a lot. But like, that's a lot of very like, being very precise, and then using an S-craft to finish them both off, so you end up killing them both at the same time. But like I said, because I beat them, obviously, but I beat Leanne first because I didn't do enough damage to Osborne. But like I said, luckily I measured it a little bit better and got it on my second try, so I was pretty pumped about that. Regardless, that was in the back of my mind, so I'm sorry I went on that huge tangent about that. It was there in my head, so I figured I'd talk about it. Getting back to the point I was originally talking about was like obviously the whole Crossbell thing of like you putting on that performance, and obviously it was very reminiscent of, you know, Elliot and Crow taking charge of the performance at the festival, and everyone at the end of it was like, man, Elliot is such a slave driver, because like not a lot of them got to experience that. Like Class 7 knows better than anything. It's like, oh, we remember how Elliot was like 2 years ago when we were doing that the festival, our performance. Like we knew how, like when it comes to music, Elliot's not the most confident, but when it comes to music, like he turns into a whole other person, like trying to make a performance. Because obviously it started with the whole like him, Fiona, and I think Altina trying to act as like a little distraction so they could get close to Ballard, Marquis, the douchebag from Orison 3, who's her uncle, or whatever their relation is. But I thought it was so interesting, like he's not as much of a douchebag in this game. Like obviously he has his ulterior motives, but he's not as bad as he was in 3. Like he was very just kind of, he caused so many damn problems in 3. It is interesting to look at 4 and look at all the damn soldats that are in mass production, plus those cannons where there was only 4 of them in 3. There's like a shit ton of them in 4. Like they made like a whole bunch, especially at the end where you get to see like when you're in the finale and you're getting ready for like the final section of the game, and there's just like tons and tons of like, you know, you're seeing both armies on both sides, and Mil Mirage, Operation Yormagon, like everything coming full circle. And speaking of full circle, I do appreciate that you get to see Van Dyke and actually get to talk to him, because I obviously, like, no matter who you bring, you're able to bring 2 members of Class 7. So obviously when you go to the hospital to check on the Emperor, it's neat that, you know, obviously Van Dyke kind of felt that you were there, and so he gets to talk to some of his former students while also getting to talk to Renne's students, you know. And it's like, I wish you the best of luck in finding Renne, you know, because I think for him it is coming from the perspective of, remember, him and Craig go back a ways with Osborne, you know. So I think in that, plus Van Dyke's in this like they're all in this complicated situation where like they don't want to take part in all this, which also makes me remember like, oh yeah, you fight Craig and you fight Olaf and Neidhart, which is so dope, because obviously you've seen bits and pieces of Neidhart fighting, like, you know, the Magic Knights in 3, but that's like the only time you really get to see him like really kind of go out and fight. So it's interesting being on the other side of that. You know, those 2 were pretty damn strong. I think it's probably supposed to, especially because there's 2 of them, it's very reminiscent in 2 when you're fighting, in the epilogue, you're fighting Beatrix and Van Dyke. I think it's supposed to be a little reminiscent of that. But regardless, like I said, I'm going on this full tangent. The whole point was, I like the whole performance. Everyone getting involved, the music rock club, from you know, it's Valerie, Pablo, and Gustav, and you've got Fiona taking part in this. I just thought that was just so dope, seeing, and Shira and Estelle dancing with Sully. I also like they do kind of set up like a Kurt and Sully thing that becomes a bit of a thing, but I thought it was like a dope, like everyone coming together type of situation. And obviously like Renne and the others are kind of bummed, like, oh, we didn't get to see the whole of a performance, but we got to hear some of it, so that was pretty dope. So I just thought that was just kind of neat, because it reminds me of once again the whole thing about Elliot's character wanting to use music to change people's hearts. You definitely see that over the course of the game, and it comes to a whole new level because it happens on more than one occasion, especially with Elliot. Like, there's actually a side quest where you're helping the 9 clubs. They're the club you're able to get the horses from. You run into its members, like, was it Albert and Wonder? You run into them from time to time, and you can get horses from them in the new places you go to for your field exercises. And so they lost their horse Kaiser Dice, and a quest is chasing after him, and what ends up happening is it gets corrupted by the curse, and Elliot wanted to try something so you wouldn't have to put the horse down. He uses his S-Craft, like his Remedy Fantasia, and it ends up healing the horse. And I thought that, he's like, ooh, I didn't expect that to work, but I'm glad it did, you know? So I thought that was such a dope moment, you know, showing just the power of music that, you know, as he says at one point in time that he wants to clear the way, you know, wants to create a melody that kind of clears the way for everyone, clears away like all of the darkness, you know. So I thought that was pretty dope, especially, you know, when you think about that in tandem with Renne and everything, you know, him being like, once again, that divine blade of light or void, however you want to, you know, go about it. I knew there was another point I wanted to make when it came to the Elliot thing. It's you run into his 3 friends that you run into when you go during your Heimdall field study. In 1, you run into his 3 friends. You run into one of them during 3 because Renne runs into her because she works at the Revelt Company branch in Heimdall. So you run into her there. But these other 2 friends, you run into them during one of Elliot's bonding events. And during that bonding event, like, because basically they took some music that his mom had wrote and it was being used as kind of propaganda for war, and he kind of, you know, they meet up in Raquel, and he's able to kind of break hold of the curse from his friends to make them realize, like, they, you know, it's wonderful what they're doing, but, you know, he's like, I'm not stopping it, because obviously they had some resentment and jealousy that, you know, like, despite them going to a music academy and everything, Elliot has a much bigger career than them, but together he was able to kind of talk to them. I think you can actually run into them again in Ortis. I want to know, it's St. Arc. You run into all 3 of them and you can talk to them again. I think it's St. Arc, but I just thought it was kind of dope how that kind of, you know, comes full circle. You know, once again, just the continuation and growth of like Elliot's story in that regard. And since I am speaking about that, it's actually kind of interesting when you think about it, obviously storytelling wise, like obviously they still play their part and everything, but obviously much like 3, the biggest focus is New Class 7, because like I brought it up before, like in 3, like New Class 7 is the characters, including Toa and everything, are the characters you spend the most time with bonding event wise, and obviously you only have like one-off bonding events with like every character of Old Class 7. I mean, it makes sense. It's like a, you know, in grand total, it's like, you know, I don't feel like doing the math. It's like what, like 16 or 17 or 18 characters. So like it gets a little, you know, but obviously it's like even storytelling wise, like obviously Old Class 7 still has their stories, you know, because it's like, you know, Laura's still advancing herself as a swordsman and obviously reaching new heights by surpassing her dad, because she was able to beat her dad when you run into him in McBurn. Fee having to deal with the whole Rutger situation. That's like the main like pull of her story, is like obviously seeing that whole situation, you know, reach its conclusion. Guy is struggling with being a Grossritter, because the fact of the matter is that, you know, it comes up at the very end, like being a Grossritter, because like for so long, like, and this ends up being actually part of one of his bonding events. And because once again, a lot of this is stuff I haven't seen everyone's bonding events, because obviously you have limited bonding events, but like one of Gaius is about the fact is that Fee kind of deals with the fact is that she once again wants to be strong enough that she's able to protect everything, you know, and show, you know, the boss like how much she's grown and everything. But then like, you know, Gaius, you know, he ends up going up against Wallace because he got so focused on being like a Grossritter that he had let he had kind of let that kind of consume him, and that title and what that meant for him, rather than just being like, he kind of lost touch with his roots as someone from Nord, as being a Nord. And you know, so it's like before, you know, kind of very much like Milliam would say, like before being, you know, a member of the intelligence, before being a homunculi, she was a member of Class 7, or being an Iron Blood, or being part of the intelligence division. Like she was a member. It was kind of similar to that, where like, you know, it's like first and foremost, before being a Grossritter, before being all that, I am a member of Class 7. That kind of comes first in this, you know, situation. So that Emma's whole situation, because even at one point in time she tries to help you break the curse, but it ends up like she ends up putting herself in danger and kind of lies to Reem. But luckily Reem was able to kind of push her out of his mind. That being, you know, an interesting, because obviously that's about that's one of their intimate, like special moment, special memory bonding events. Circling back to Laura, because like theirs gets pretty intimate, because obviously they're like training on Brionia Island for a bit, and it's so interesting because you see like her get flirty, but like you never see her get like super intimate the way she did. And even she was saying, like, obviously she's always talking about like those are aspects about herself that she has to kind of, you know, work on, so that kind of catches you off guard. Eustace, you see a little bit about you know, because obviously I brought it up about the sword that he gets from Berea Harbor, because you sneak in that basically because Arnold is the one that kind of has to deal with a lot of that stuff while he's away, like, you know, not being, you know, Duke Alberea at the time, you know, so like you know, he wants to help lighten Arnold's load and kind of take some of that, you know, shoulder some of that responsibility. So still balancing that, you know, still having his own part to play as, you know, the head of the Alberea family, while also doing his duties as a member of Class 7. Sarah, hers deal with like her dad, kind of getting closure on that part, to the point like, Nidhogg and the Northern Jaegers, those who are still around, because some of them have basically been recruited by the government. They come to visit her dad and pay their respects. Same thing kind of plays a little bit later on, when it comes to Rutger's funeral, because I think Shirley shows up. I know Shirley shows up, Sarah shows up, Randy shows up, and a lot of other people to pay their respects, because, you know, Rutger, you know, made a lot of friends, yet also made a lot of enemies. So that was like one of Fee's. Who else am I forgetting? Because sadly, you don't have any with Milliam. To be fair, like Milliam doesn't. Well, maybe I don't think she has any bonding events, because it's not till like the second rivalry that you're able to communicate with her. So by then, I don't think there were any bonding points available at that point. I think you probably could with the whole like very end. Maybe that was a possibility, but I don't remember. Well, once again, like I'll probably be able to flush that out, you know, even more like during my second playthrough. But I'm definitely forgetting. Oh right, Machias, because obviously the accountability organization that he's a part of. Because obviously, like you run into Rainer, and Rainer's trying to like figure stuff out, you know, figure out his part to play. Because obviously, there's a whole thing in Ouster, the place where Oliver was actually born, where his mom Ariel was born. Which I like that you're able to go there, because Sandy brings it up that Class 7 helped out in during the Civil War, but I'm like, that didn't happen. But it's one of those things that happened between the finale, the final chapter, and the epilogue, because basically Altina was there as an ally, and at that point they were on good terms. So like when you go there, two of the kids are like, oh Altina, it's so cool to see you again, because they're familiar with Old Class 7 and Altina because they helped out during some stuff during the Civil War. So it's kind of like post Civil War where things were still going on. I think is kind of where that fell in line, because they didn't really go into it too much in 3, but it's cool to see the town. Obviously this is where he grew up, where like, because obviously this is the first place you go to at the beginning of the game, where it's well, they show cutscene wise at the beginning during the opening, because this is a place that's mourning Oliver's death the most, you know. So I just thought that was just, like, obviously one of the quests later on takes you there, because there's the whole Hugo thing, because like Wads or Wades, however you want to pronounce his name, was being controlled by the curse, and he was working with the mayor, because the mayor was all about getting people signed up, because, you know, it's one of those things I brought up in a previous one about how NPCs will disappear from where they're supposed to be at just because they ended up joining the military. Actually, speaking of it, it's actually, once again, those interesting connections. One of the people you meet at Titus Gate is the inn owner from Legram. Obviously, you don't meet him in 3 or 4. I mean, you don't meet him in 3, but obviously you ran into him in 1 and 2. Anytime you went to Legram. So it's interesting because he was consumed by the curse, because it's like, oh my god, Calvert, they killed Viscount Arcade, I'm here to get revenge. But eventually he finds out about Victor and kind of laments like, oh, why was I all about this war and everything? Why was I all about revenge and stuff like that? And obviously that kind of plays the same role in like Alistair, because the mayor was just consumed with, you know, it's like, yeah, we got to do our patriotic thing, you know, but obviously he went too far. Wads was the one that went even further. But it was interesting finding out what Hugo's whole thing was, because obviously you run into Hugo pretty early on in the game, and then after that you run into him like twice, because like there's a side quest that you initially deal with Wads, and then like you run into him the second time, and that's when you also run into Hugo again. But basically, Hugo knew what was going to happen, and he was trying to benefit. He was trying, like, his business practices was reflective of him trying to do what he thought was best to make his family's company survive what was going to happen to the world when this all went down. But he got so consumed in that, you know, that he kind of went about, you know, he lost sight of so much. And obviously, it took, you know, Becky kind of. You know, and it obviously sets up like there might be something there, but even Becky's like, anytime like Rin kind of suggests it, and Becky's like, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. But it's like, it clearly can work, you know, opposites do attract. Like, you know, obviously it's always been a thing between Becky and Hugo since the first game, you know. Once again, I just went on a huge tangent, and I do apologize. The whole point I was making was just the whole Machias situation about his job of being part of like the I always forget like his job position, but basically they're kind of like almost like they're basically like internal affairs almost. They're like an accountability group that like makes sure that all the government agencies are doing what all groups are doing what they're supposed to be doing and not doing anything shady. And obviously, like, you know, like I said, Rainer's doing most of the hard work, because like, you know, Machias is with Class 7 doing his day, but obviously like running into his dad, who was kind of put in charge of Ortis. But it's like he fought a lot of this stuff, but he was still in that position, much like everyone else, where he still has an obligation to the government and stuff like that. So he knows, he's one of those people like Marquis Higharm, who knows what's going on, but still just kind of like there's a limited amount of stuff you can do, but you're trying to do the best you can. Because I think he has Alphen and Toa, if I'm not, yeah, because I think I forgot who was it that had Tio. It was, yeah, because Claire and Angelica pop up there, and that's where you actually free Angelica. Regardless, like I said, I'm going on a huge tangent, but It's interesting because obviously, like, I made that whole point about having a sense of justice, but obviously Machias has one too. Once again, it's that whole thing of seeing how full circle like his story has come, because once again I brought it up in 3. Like, there's little bits between him and Machias, but it's not as much as it was in 1 and 2. Obviously, it's worse in 1. It's there still in 2, but it's not nearly as much in 3 and 4. It's like a lot more small scale. Like, they have little interactions here and there, but it's not like it was before. So showing that they would never admit it, but they definitely have grown closer over the course of the game as well, you know? Regardless, this portion I know has been going on for a while. I don't know what the time length is going to be on this one, but I'm sure it's probably going to be pretty lengthy because I'm, you know. Regardless, I'm going to end this section, well, this part of the discussion here, and I'm going to continue it on in the next part. But till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.